Your dad's gone, and this house is mine now since I'm his wife. My stepmom scolded me, sounding like I was a naughty kid. The funeral had just finished, leaving me feeling as heavy and gloomy as a stormy sky. Angry, I snapped back. This is my home from childhood. You should leave with all your affairs with younger guys, betraying Dad. You don't deserve to be called his wife. She just snorted and said, tough luck. I'm getting the house and $1,000,000 from the estate. I'll give you a measly $50. I couldn't help but laugh, which annoyed her. When I showed her a document, her face turned pale. Can you read this? I asked. She went white, stuttering, no, it can't be true, right? I'm Kelly, a 29-year-old homemaker who also works part-time. My dad was a lawyer, pretty well known in his field. He started his own firm and put in long hours with a few colleagues. My mom passed away when I was young, so I don't remember much about her. Dad was always busy with work, so I was mostly raised by my grandmother, but I never felt lacking because of it. Grandma was always kind, and I had plenty of other supportive relationships. I sailed through high school without much trouble, but when I started university, things changed. A new woman entered our family, disrupting the dynamic. It had always been just Dad and me. This lady will be your mother from today. Try to get along, Dad suddenly announced. She was decked out in designer clothes from head to toe. Nice to meet you, Kelly. You can call me Mom, and we can go shopping together, she said brightly. She seemed like someone I could be friends with, but living with her as a mother was a different story. Our personalities clashed, and it was clear we weren't going to get along. I'm more of a homebody, enjoying my days off with a coffee and relaxation indoors. My stepmother, on the other hand, was always out and about, shopping or going to parties. We didn't exactly clash, but we tended to keep our distance from each other. The real trouble began after I graduated from university and got a job as an office worker. My workplace was a 20-minute train ride from home, so I decided to stick around at my parents' house for a while. My relationship with my stepmom stayed peaceful, so I saw no urgent reason to move out. About 6 months into my job, I found myself at a social gathering with my coworkers. I'm not big on drinking, but I couldn't skip out on this party since almost everyone from work was going. On the way home, walking through a busy street with a few colleagues heading the same way, I spotted someone familiar from behind. It was my stepmother. Wondering what she was doing there, I glanced next to her and saw a young man I didn't recognize walking beside her. If they were just walking together, I might have thought they were friends despite the age gap. I was taken aback when I saw my stepmother walking arm in arm with a young man. The intimate vibe between them made me catch my breath. A colleague noticed my reaction and asked what was wrong, but I just laughed it off, unable to confide in someone I barely knew about the possibility of my stepmother cheating. I quickly made an excuse to leave and followed them, easily blending into the busy downtown crowd. As they walked, my stepmother and the young man seemed comfortable with each other, chatting closely like a couple. After about 3 minutes, they glanced around cautiously before entering a building. It turned out to be a lodging facility, and the shock of the discovery made me feel sick. I left the area, feeling betrayed and angry. The next morning, when my stepmother returned home, slightly drunk from a night out, I confronted her. She sarcastically asked what was wrong, noting that I usually avoided her. I didn't hold back, telling her I saw her with the young man entering a hotel. Caught off guard, she tried to dismiss it, suggesting it might have been someone who looked like her. She challenged me to provide proof, putting me in a difficult spot because I had none. Despite knowing what I saw, I couldn't confront her without evidence. Even though I saw the truth with my own eyes, she easily brushed it off. You're too naive, Kelly. Maybe it's because you come from a good family, she taunted. She accused me of wanting to kick her out of the house, but defiantly claimed she wouldn't leave until I could prove it. Frustrated by her dismissive attitude, I was determined to expose her infidelity. I scraped together all the money I could and hired a private investigator. After a week of investigation, the shocking truth came out. She was cheating with 3 different young men simultaneously. Armed with this evidence, I went to my father, who had always been distant due to his busy schedule. But he brushed me off, barely acknowledging my presence as he buried himself in his work. He even interrupted me when his phone rang, showing little concern for my troubles. It was a painful reminder of his neglect throughout my life. Feeling disillusioned and unsupported, I decided to leave, distancing myself from my father and stepmother. Living on my own for the first time was tough, but it was a relief to escape the indifference of my father and the recklessness of my stepmother. It was a chaotic transition, but ultimately, life felt more comfortable without them. Years later, I found love with a senior colleague at work, and we eventually got married. We decided against a wedding ceremony to avoid facing my father and stepmother, whose presence I couldn't bear. Instead, I sent my father a photo of me in my wedding dress. Our life together began, and we were happiest planning our future, like building a house or starting a family. In the years since I moved out, I rarely heard from my father, so it was a shock when his name flashed on my phone one day. The voice on the other end introduced himself as one of my father's colleagues and told me my father had collapsed at work and was in the hospital. I rushed to his side immediately. At the hospital, a man in a suit met me at the entrance and led me to my father's room. He lay pale and motionless in the bed, surrounded by tubes. His colleague explained they couldn't reach his wife, my stepmother. It seemed he had tried to contact her as well. Despite multiple attempts, my father's colleague couldn't reach my stepmother. Feeling hesitant to trouble him further, I reluctantly decided to call her myself. However, she didn't answer my calls initially. After about 30 minutes, she finally called back, sounding annoyed at the inconvenience. I informed her about my father's situation and asked when she could come to the hospital. With a groan, she dismissed the urgency and cheerfully stated that she was too busy to come, leaving everything to me. Before I could respond, she hung up abruptly. I tried calling her back immediately, but her phone was off. It seemed she had deliberately switched it off. I had hoped that even though my stepmother had shown her indifference before, she would still come to the hospital when my father collapsed. However, she proved me wrong. She not only failed to visit, but also didn't bother to show any concern for him during his time in the hospital. I took on the responsibility of managing his hospital admissions, daily care, and paperwork, using up my paid leave in the process. Despite our estrangement over the years, I couldn't shake off the worry for my father. I visited him daily, hoping for his recovery, but unfortunately, he never woke up. His passing left me overwhelmed with tasks. I had to handle legal matters, arrange the funeral, and notify acquaintances from his law firm. Although his colleagues were helpful in reaching out to relevant parties, my stepmother remained absent until the day of the funeral. Seeing her shed tears at my father's coffin, after showing no support during his illness, angered me. It felt like the mockery of his memory. In a moment of intense emotion, I couldn't contain myself. I grabbed her arm and pulled her outside, expressing my frustration and anger. I told her to never show her face to me again, fed up with her insincerity and hypocrisy. My stepmother's abrupt halt to her tears was jarring. With a snide remark about my supposed acting, she made her exit, leaving behind a lingering threat. 2 weeks later, after the funeral and the settling of affairs, I returned to my childhood home for the first time in years. My purpose was clear: to begin sorting through my father's belongings in earnest. While I had previously relocated documents pertaining to his work, personal items like clothes and books remained untouched. I didn't expect my stepmother to take an interest in them, so the task fell to me. About an hour into my organizing efforts, my stepmother returned home, bursting into the living room with an air of authority. Her accusatory tone, as if scolding a misbehaving child, didn't sit well with me. I stood my ground, ready to assert myself. As I sorted through my father's things, my stepmother interrupted, claiming ownership of the house and the $1 million inheritance. She offered me a measly $50, which I found absurd and couldn't help but laugh. This seemed to irritate her, and she insisted that she, as my father's wife, had the right to everything. But I challenged her, pointing out that she was only a common law wife and not a legal hair. She froze, realizing her mistake, and tried to argue her case, but I stood my ground. I suggested that she was sloppy in hiding her affairs and avoiding official marriage documents. I refused to let her kick me out, unleashing years of frustration. She tried to argue back, mentioning a will or life insurance policy, but I knew her claims wouldn't hold up. It turned out that my stepmother's claims were baseless. There was no will, and I was the beneficiary of the life insurance policy. Additionally, proving her status as a common-law wife would be challenging, especially given her affairs. Despite not being well-versed in survivor pensions, it seemed enough to intimidate her. As her hopes crumbled, my stepmother's demeanor grew more serious. With a final ultimatum, I demanded she leave or face police intervention. Frustrated, she hastily packed her belongings and left. Later, I heard rumors about her struggles. Dependent on my father's income, she hadn't worked in years and struggled to find stable employment. Reduced to odd jobs, she now lived day to day. Despite her struggles, my stepmother's selfish nature persisted. She attempted to seek support from old acquaintances, but none were willing to accommodate her. Desperate and lacking funds, she resorted to a shocking move, approaching my husband, claiming her superiority in looks and appeal over me. It was a transparent attempt to stir up trouble, but my husband firmly rejected her advances. Frustrated by her failed attempts to disrupt my family, my stepmother's actions only evoked pity. I swiftly involved the authorities, and she received a stern warning. Hopefully, she learned from this experience. While sorting through my father's belongings, I stumbled upon his diary. Though hesitant to invade his privacy, I couldn't resist the urge to peek. The entries revealed his deep concern for my well-being and future. It became clear that his hard work was driven by a desire to ensure my financial security and happiness. Tucked within the pages was a cherished photo, my young father, my biological mother, and me, all beaming with joy. It was a poignant reminder that I was truly loved by my parents. As I flipped through the diary, another photo caught my eye, a recent one of my father and my stepmother. Despite my confusion about why my father stayed in a common-law relationship with my stepmother, it was evident that he cared for her in his own way. Sadly, her feelings didn't seem to match his. Determined to understand and reciprocate love, I was overjoyed to discover that I was pregnant. Recent visits to the hospital confirmed that our baby is developing well. Looking ahead to our child's future, my husband and I made the decision to move into the house my father left us. Our current apartment doesn't have enough space for a nursery, so we're willing to invest in a suitable home for our growing family. Every decision we make is with our child's best interests at heart. Just as my parents loved me, I am committed to showering this child with love and care. It's a